My wife hadn't been under the ground for one full day when my son sat in her chair, the chair where she did her needlework every afternoon, looked me in the eyes and said, "Your good life is over, Dad." After that, he took my cards, locked my accounts, left me without a dime, and looked at me as if I were garbage that needed to be taken out. 82 years of building, and in one morning, my son wiped me off the map. If this story touches your soul, please subscribe. Every day there is a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you're listening from. I still have the smell of the cemetery dirt on my hands. No matter how much I washed them, it's still there. That deep, damp, recently buried smell. I can still feel the weight of Mary's coffin when we lowered it into the grave. How my arms trembled. How I felt like I was sinking along with her. And here I am, sitting in my own living room, looking at a dead cell phone and some debit cards that are useless. I have them spread out on the table like the cards of a lost game. My name is Nick Guerrero Belgrave. I am 82 years old, and 40 years ago, I built an auto parts factory that now employs 120 families. 40 years of waking up before dawn, 40 years of sweat, of risk, of sleepless nights. But none of that matters now. Because yesterday, I buried my wife. And today, my son buried me. Mary died on Thursday at 6 in the afternoon. I was sitting next to her bed, as I had every day for the past 3 years. I knew every sound in that room. The hum of the air conditioning, the drip of the IV, the constant beeping of the monitor that tracked her heart. Kidney failure had slowly eaten away at her body, but she never complained. Not once. That afternoon, the monitor started beeping differently, slower, more spaced out, like a clock winding down. She opened her eyes and looked for me. Those brown eyes that made me fall in love 60 years ago. I took her hand. It was cold, very cold. I tried to warm it with mine, but I couldn't. She squeezed my fingers with what little strength she had left and said, "It doesn't hurt anymore, my dear. It doesn't hurt anymore." Then she took one breath, 2 breaths, and on the third, the air didn't come back out. The monitor drew a straight line and let out a long beep that I still hear when I close my eyes. I stayed right there, with her hand in mine, unable to let go, unwilling to let go, because I knew that once I did, everything would be over. The wake was on Friday. The funeral home smelled of old flowers and candle wax. People came, hugged me, and said things I didn't hear. She's in a better place. She's not suffering anymore. She was a great woman. Empty words that bounced off my ears without sinking in. Robert was there for a while, serious, standing in a corner with his arms crossed. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just watched. He looked at the coffin. He looked at the people. He looked at me. But he never came over to hug me. That night, I went home alone. The house was dark and smelled stale. I lay down in our bed, on my usual side, and hugged Mary's pillow. I buried my face in it. It still smelled of her gardenia perfume. That scent I first knew when I was 22 years old, and that had been with me every day since. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine she was there, sleeping next to me like always, that I would wake up and everything would be as it was before. But on Saturday, at 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang, and everything went to hell. I opened the door expecting a neighbor with condolences, a basket of muffins, some flowers. But it was Robert. His shirt was wrinkled and his eyes were dry. He walked into the house without greeting me, without hugging me, without saying, "I'm sorry, Dad," as if he were walking into an office. Behind him was Joan, his wife, with her head down and her eyes glued to the floor. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. Behind her was Raymond, my 16-year-old grandson, who didn't look up from his phone even to say hello. I don't even know if he saw me. I offered them coffee. Nobody answered. Robert walked straight to the living room with firm steps, as if the house already belonged to him. And then I saw it. He sat down in Mary's chair, the chair where she did her needlework every afternoon, where she had her chamomile tea, where she sat reading me recipes from the newspaper while I had breakfast. I felt nausea rise in my chest. Bile reached my throat. But I stayed quiet. I thought, maybe he didn't notice. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it's not on purpose. Robert looked at me from that chair as if he were already the owner of everything. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't sadness. It wasn't mourning. It was nothing a son should feel the day after burying his mother. It was something cold, calculated, something I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did recognize it, but I never wanted to see it. He said, "Dad, we need to talk." I nodded. I thought it was about the funeral, the paperwork, Mary's will, the insurance claims. But then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a document. A sheet with seals, a letterhead, with small letters that I couldn't read from where I was. He put it on the coffee table, right on top of the magazines Mary never finished leafing through, and said, "Sign here. It's a power of attorney. Starting today, I'm taking care of the accounts, the business, everything. It's for your own good. You're not up to it." I looked at him without understanding, unable to believe what I was hearing. I said, "What are you talking about, Robert? I buried your mother yesterday. What kind of son are you?" He didn't blink. He didn't move a muscle in his face. He just said, "Precisely because of that." I refused to sign. I told him he was crazy, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he should leave my house and not come back until his madness had passed. He stood up slowly, with the calm of a snake, put the paper back in his pocket, and looked down at me. He was a head taller than me, and in that moment, I realized that my son was seeing me as an obstacle, as something to be removed from the path. He said, "All right, then we'll do this the hard way. You decide." And he walked towards the door without haste, as if he already knew exactly what was going to happen next. Joan followed him without looking at me, dragging her feet. Raymond, too, with his phone glued to his face, oblivious to everything, as if nothing were happening. I stood in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding in my chest so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't understand what the hard way meant. But half an hour later, I found out, and the floor opened up beneath me. First, it was the cell phone. I was in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water because my mouth was dry when the screen suddenly went black. A white message appeared that said, "Line canceled by the account holder." I felt an emptiness in my stomach. I went to the desktop computer to check the bank. I sat down, opened the page, entered my usual password. Mary's date of birth with my initials, the one I had used for 20 years. Invalid data. I entered it again, more carefully, letter by letter. Account blocked. Please contact your branch. I felt a cold sweat run down my back between my shoulder blades. My hand started shaking over the keyboard. I went to the landline in the living room. I dialed the bank's number. A recording told me that the number was in the process of transferring to another account holder. I hung up and stared at the device as if it were a dead animal. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. I repeated those words out loud, as if saying them could change what was happening, but nothing changed. I walked around the house like a sleepwalker, trying to understand what had just happened. My feet felt heavy. My head was spinning. I went to the desk and opened the drawer where I kept emergency cash. A wad of cash I had kept there for years, just in case. $500 in $200 bills, wrapped in a rubber band. The drawer was empty. Not a single bill. Not even the rubber band. I felt a hollow in my chest. I checked the pockets of all my jackets in the closet, one by one, looking for something, anything. Nothing. Loose change, an old piece of gum, crumpled receipts. I went to the bedroom and looked in Mary's nightstand, where she kept a few dollars for Sunday church offerings, in a small wooden box her mother gave her. Also empty. The box was there, open, mocking me. Robert had entered my house before coming to see me. He had searched everywhere. He had opened every drawer, every pocket, every hiding place. He had taken every dollar he found. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands shaking, feeling the floor move beneath my feet as if there were an earthquake. In less than an hour, my own son had left me without bank access, without a phone, without cash. He had turned me into a homeless person inside my own house. I don't know how long I stood there in the middle of the room, staring at nothing. Minutes, hours. Time ceased to exist. When I finally reacted, the sun had already set, and the house was dark. I hadn't turned on a single light. I hadn't eaten anything. I hadn't had any water. I walked to the living room, dragging my feet, and sat on Mary's favorite sofa. The same one where she did her embroidery every afternoon while I read the newspaper, and she told me the neighbors' gossip. I ran my hand over the fabric of the backrest. Rough, worn by the years, it still had a thread stuck in it from the last piece of embroidery she hadn't finished. A tablecloth with blue flowers she was making for the new dining room. "For when we remodel," she would say, "it's going to look beautiful." The dining room we would never use. The tablecloth she would never finish. I stayed there caressing that thread until my eyes blurred. I didn't eat that night. I couldn't. My stomach was hard and tight as a rock. I felt nauseous just thinking about food. I stayed sitting in the darkness, without turning on the light, looking at Mary's portrait on the mantel. The photo from our 50th anniversary. We took it in the garden, next to the rose bushes she planted. She was wearing her blue knee-length dress, smiling with all her teeth, her hair pulled back the way she liked it. I was hugging her by the waist, looking at her as if the world didn't exist, because for me it didn't. She was everything. I spoke to her out loud, in the darkness, my voice breaking. I said, "Mary, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong with that boy? How did I raise him so poorly? What did he lack? What did he have too much of? What did I do to make him hate me like this?" But she didn't answer. Of course not, because she was gone. And I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. I stayed sitting on that couch until dawn, reviewing the last few months as if they were a movie. Robert's visits, increasingly frequent, increasingly long. His questions about the company, the partners, the accounts, the contracts, about who had authorized signatures. I thought it was interest, that he was finally maturing, that he wanted to learn the business, that he wanted to earn my trust. But no, it was reconnaissance. He was scouting the territory. He was looking for weak points. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. And the right moment was the day after burying his mother. The day I was the most destroyed, most vulnerable, most alone, easiest to knock down. He planned it like this, with coldness, with calculation, as if I were an enemy and not his father. But the worst part wasn't what had already happened. The worst part was what awaited me outside. Because when I stepped out onto the street the next day, I discovered that my son hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my name. On Monday, I woke up determined to go out. I couldn't stay locked inside those walls, waiting for Robert to come and finish me off. I had to understand the extent of the damage. I had to see with my own eyes how much he had destroyed me. I went to take a shower, and the water was freezing cold. The water heater wouldn't turn on. I stood there, under the cold spray, shivering, feeling every drop hit me like a punishment. I got dressed in the same clothes as yesterday because I couldn't focus enough to look for anything else. I buttoned my shirt with clumsy fingers. I put on my shoes without socks because I couldn't find any. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw an old man I didn't recognize. Sunken eyes, surrounded by purple dark circles, ashen skin, colorless, like a corpse, a 2-day-old beard, white and patchy. I looked like a homeless person. I looked crazy. I searched my wallet. 3 crumpled bills, $400. That was all I had left in the world, all I had to survive on. I walked out onto the street with an empty stomach and a tight heart. The sun hit my face and I had to squint. I didn't know that day I was going to be humiliated 3 times, each one worse than the last. First, I went to the St. Raphael Pharmacy on the corner of Main and Elm, where I had bought my medication for 10 years. I needed my blood pressure pill, the one I take every morning with breakfast. Without it, I could have a crisis at any moment. The doctor had warned me, "Mr. Nick, you can't play around with your heart." The girl at the counter recognized me when I walked in and smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mr. Nick. How are you? Are you feeling better?" I told her, "Yes, thank you. I was here for my medicine." I gave her the prescription and waited, leaning on the counter, looking at the shelves of vitamins and syrups. She prepared the order, put it in a small white bag, and swiped my card through the terminal. The machine made a noise, that noise you know. Declined. She swiped it again, slower. Declined. She looked at me uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed, and said, "I'm sorry, sir, it's not going through. Do you have another card?" I felt a heat rise up my neck. I took out one of my 3 bills and paid in cash. The change barely covered a cup of coffee. I walked out with a paper bag and a bitter taste in my mouth. But that was just the beginning, the warm-up before the game. I walked to the bank with heavy legs, the central branch in Albany, in the pink granite building across from the park. I had an account there for more than 40 years. I signed my first loan there to buy the factory machinery. I deposited my first $100,000 there, the proudest day of my life. Everyone knew me there. The tellers, the guards, the secretaries, the managers. They greeted me by name, offered me coffee, saw me privately. But when I walked in that morning, I saw new faces, young people in cheap suits and plastic smiles, people who didn't know who I was. I asked to speak to the manager. The receptionist looked me up and down, my wrinkled clothes, my unshaven beard, and said, "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." They made me wait 20 minutes on a hard plastic chair next to the door, as if I were any ordinary customer coming to ask for a loan. Finally, a guy in a gray suit came out, in his 30s, with gel in his hair and a look on his face like he had more important things to do. He looked at me without any respect and said, "Follow me," and led me to a small cubicle with glass walls where everyone could see but no one could hear, like a fishbowl, like a zoo cage. The manager sat down behind a laminate desk and opened his computer. He typed something with 2 fingers, slowly, while I watched him from the other side. Then he frowned, tilted his head, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. He said in a low but sharp voice, like a knife wrapped in velvet, "Mr. Guerrero, your account has a precautionary block. It was requested 2 days ago by a direct family member, a son, according to the record. The reason given is..." He paused for a long time, as if it was hard to say, as if he were embarrassed. Presumed cognitive impairment. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The air left my lungs. I repeated the words like an echo. Cognitive impairment? He nodded without looking me in the eyes, shuffling papers on his desk. He said, "It means there are doubts about your mental capacity to manage your own resources. It's a standard procedure in these cases. Don't worry. It's temporary until the family situation is resolved." I wanted to yell at him. I wanted to stand up and grab him by the tie and tell him that I had built more in 1 year than he would build in his entire miserable life. That I employed 120 families while he couldn't even type correctly. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come out. I was speechless, mouth open, feeling the world crumble around me. I got up from the chair without saying anything and left the cubicle. The receptionist said something I didn't hear. The guard opened the door for me. I walked out into the street and felt my legs shaking, like they wouldn't hold me up. A cold sweat ran down the back of my neck and soaked my shirt. People were walking past me, moving normally, buying things, talking on the phone, laughing, living their lives. And I felt like everyone was looking at me, that everyone knew, that everyone was thinking, "There goes the crazy old man, the one who can't even handle his money anymore." I leaned against a granite wall next to a newsstand and took several deep breaths, trying to calm down. My heart was beating very fast, too fast. I thought, I'm going to collapse right here on the street. They're going to find me lying there like a dog. I needed to sit down. I needed to eat something, to fill my stomach with anything. Then I thought of the Patroness, the diner where I had lunch for over 30 years. I had a monthly account there that I paid promptly on the first of every month, without fail. They had known me all my life. They treated me like what I was. I was still someone there. I walked the 4 blocks to downtown, my hands shaking and my stomach rumbling. I walked through the carved wooden door and the waiter, Julian, saw me immediately. He smiled that same old smile and said, "Mr. Nick, good to see you. The usual table?" I sat in my usual spot, by the window overlooking the park, where I could watch people go by while I ate. I ordered the usual: steak, medium rare, fresh corn tortillas, home-style pinto beans, and a cinnamon coffee. I ate slowly, chewing every bite, trying to savor the meat, the salt, the spice, trying to feel that I still existed, that I was still the man I had been, the one who came here to close deals, the one who invited his partners to lunch, the one who left good tips because he could afford to. I looked around and saw familiar faces. Lawyer Pierce at a corner table with his wife eating salad. Mr. Aubrey from the Rotary Club at another table, discussing something with some partners with papers in hand under. Villanueva at the counter having black coffee. People who had greeted me with respect for decades. People who knew me back when this was a small town and I was a young man with big dreams. When I finished eating, I called Julian over with a gesture of my hand and said, "Put it on the monthly tab." He nodded, collected the plates, and headed toward the kitchen. But he took a long time to return. Too long. And I sensed something was wrong. When Julian came back, he walked slowly and wouldn't look me in the eyes. He held his hands clasped as if he were nervous. He said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Mr. Nick, excuse me. The manager wants to speak with you." I felt my stomach drop. That emptiness you feel when you know something bad is coming. The manager appeared a moment later, a heavy-set guy with a mustache, whom I had known for years, but never liked. He approached my table but didn't sit down. He stood there, looking down at me with his arms crossed over his belly, and spoke loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every word. "Mr. Guerrero, unfortunately, your account with us has been canceled. Mr. Robert Guerrero called personally yesterday to inform us. He left very clear instructions that you are no longer in possession of your mental faculties. He said not to extend you any credit under any circumstances, and that he will not recognize or pay any debt you incur. I am very sorry, but you will have to pay in cash." I felt my face burning. The blood rushed to my head. My ears were ringing. I saw in slow motion how the couple at the next table stopped eating and turned to stare at me with their mouths open. I saw Lawyer Pierce lean toward his wife and whisper something in her ear, pointing at me with his chin. I saw Mr. Aubrey lower his head and look at his plate, uncomfortable, as if he was ashamed to know me. They were all staring at me, all judging me, all thinking the same thing. Poor old man. He went crazy. He's finished. He's useless. Pity him. I took out the 2 bills I had left, $200, and put them on the table. It didn't even cover the coffee. Julian, with sad eyes, said, "Mr. Nick, don't worry. I'll cover it from my tips. There's no—" But I didn't let him finish. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want anyone's pity. I stood up from the chair with my knees shaking and walked toward the door. Every step weighed like lead. Every step was a mile. I felt their gazes stuck to my back like knives, like needles, like hot coals. I walked out onto the sidewalk and stood there, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. The midday sun hit my face, strong, burning my skin. But I felt cold, a coldness that came from inside, from my bones, from my soul. I had no money. I had no phone. I had no one to call. I had nowhere to go. I looked at the cobblestone street that I had walked 1,000 times since I was a child. The same shops, the same trees, the same iron benches. But everything seemed strange to me, as if it no longer belonged to me, as if I no longer belonged there, as if I had been erased from the map and no one had noticed. I thought of Mary, of how she always knew what to do when things got tough, how she always had a word, an idea, a solution, how she would take my hand and tell me, "You can do it, my dear. You've always been able to." But she was gone, and I was alone, completely alone, in the middle of a street full of people. I had never felt so alone in my life. Then I heard a voice behind me, a woman's voice, timid, concerned. "Mr. Nick?" I turned around slowly, almost without strength. It was Mrs. Rose Lusion, my neighbor from number 12, in her 70s, a widow for a decade, always with her 2 cats and her floral apron. We had known each other by sight for 30 years. We would greet each other on the street, but we had never exchanged more than 3 words. We had never had a real conversation. She looked at me with wide eyes, scared, as if she were seeing a ghost. Then she looked around, quickly, as if making sure no one was watching us. No one was listening to us. She took a step closer, grabbed my arm with her small hand, and said in a low voice, almost a secret, "What happened to you, Mr. Nick? Why are you like this? Are you sick? You look terrible. You look like you've seen a dead man." And I didn't know what to answer. The words wouldn't come out, because in a way, the dead man was me. They had killed me without touching me. They had buried me without digging a grave. Rose took my arm firmly and said, "Come with me. You can't just stand here. People are staring at you." We walked in silence to her house, 3 blocks down, on streets I knew by heart, but which now seemed like another world. I kept my eyes on the ground, unable to look up, counting the cobblestones as if they were the days I had left to live. When we reached her door, a green door with geranium pots, she took out her keys, opened it, and let me in. Inside, it smelled of fresh coffee and sweet bread. The two cats looked at me from a sofa with suspicion. Rose sat me down in her living room and went to the kitchen. I heard the clatter of cups, the sound of boiling water. She came back with a tray, chamomile tea, animal crackers, an embroidered napkin. She served me as if I were a sick child. And in a way, I was. My hands trembled when I took the cup. She sat down across from me, in a flowered armchair that smelled of mothballs, and looked at me with those eyes that women who have seen too much possess. She said, "Nick, I'm going to tell you what's happening, what all of Albany is saying, because you need to know, and because no one else is going to tell you." I nodded without speaking. The tea burned my fingers, but I didn't let go. I needed to feel something, anything. Rose took a deep breath and began to speak. She told me that Robert had been calling everyone for the last week. Business partners, club acquaintances, neighborhood residents. He told everyone the same thing, that I had dementia, that I had started forgetting things, confusing names, getting lost on the street, that I didn't recognize some guests at the funeral, that I had tried to pay with an expired card, that I was a danger to myself, and that the family was taking steps to protect me. She told me everything non-stop, without pauses, like someone ripping off a Band-Aid in one go. And I was frozen, paralyzed, with the teacup suspended in the air and a ringing in my ears that wouldn't let me think. When I could speak, only one word came out. Dementia? I repeated it several times, as if saying it could help me understand. I looked at my hands, steady, not shaking. I remembered the company's last quarterly balance sheet. $23,400,000 in assets, $15.7 million in liabilities, an operating margin of 12%. I remembered it completely, without hesitation. I remembered the number on my first driver's license, my wedding date, the name of the doctor who delivered Robert. I remembered every contract I had signed in the last 40 years. And I thought, my son is killing me. Not with a knife, not with poison. He is killing me with words. He is erasing me from the map while I am still breathing. Rose looked at me in silence, waiting for my reaction. I handed her the empty cup and stood up. My legs were shaking, but I held myself steady. I said, "Thank you, Rose, for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy person." She stood up too and took my arm. She said, "Nick, you have to do something. If you stay quiet, they're going to bury you alive. Robert is moving fast. He has lawyers, he has contacts. If you don't react now, it will be too late when you want to." I nodded. I walked towards the door. Before leaving, I turned around and said, "I'm going to the company. I'm going to show them who I am. I'm going to stand in front of my son and tell him that he will not destroy me." She looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear, and I walked out into the street with my heart pounding in my throat. I arrived at the factory at 4 p.m, the same factory I built with my hands, the same gate I passed through thousands of times for 40 years. The usual guard, Mr. Frank, wasn't there anymore. In his place was a guy in his 20s, with a new uniform and a hostile look. When he saw me coming, he raised his hand as if he were a traffic cop. He said, "Identification, please." I looked at him, unable to believe it. I said, "I am Nick Guerrero Belgrave, the owner of this company, the one who pays your salary." The guy didn't even flinch. He looked at a sheet of paper on the desk, ran his finger down a list, and said, without looking at me, "I'm sorry, sir. Your name is not authorized for entry. Orders from management." I felt the blood rush to my head. I clenched my fists. I said, "Listen, kid. I founded this company before you were born. I laid every brick, bought every machine, invested every dollar that's in here. So you're going to lift that barrier and let me pass." The guy looked at me with a calm that made me angrier than if he had shouted at me. He said, "Sir, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to call security." Security? On me? I took a deep breath. I swallowed my rage. I said, "Fine, call someone inside, anyone. Let them tell me to my face that I can't enter." The guy nodded, picked up a phone, spoke in a low voice for a minute, then hung up and said, "You can wait in the reception area. Someone will see you." I walked into the reception area and sat on one of those plastic chairs they use for vendors. Me, sitting like a vendor in my own company. I waited 5 minutes, 10, 20. The receptionist, another new face, wouldn't even look at me. She typed on her computer as if I didn't exist. Finally, the hallway door opened and a woman appeared. Young, early 30s, straight hair to her shoulders, a gray pantsuit, high heels, a perfect smile. One of those smiles that doesn't reach the eyes. She walked toward me with short steps and extended her hand as if I were a client. She said, "Mr. Guerrero, what a pleasure. I'm Penelope Ora Medina, Mr. Roberts' executive assistant. How can I help you?" I looked her up and down. I had never seen her in my life. I said, "I want to talk to my son." She didn't lose her smile. She said, "Mr. Robert is in a very important meeting. He can't be interrupted. If you'd like, I can schedule an appointment for next week. Does Thursday at 10 work for you?" I looked at her, unable to believe it. I said, "An appointment to talk to my own son in my own company?" She tilted her head as if I were a confused old man. She said, "I understand this might be difficult, Mr. Guerrero, but things have changed. There are new procedures, new protocols. Everything is for the good of the company." She was talking to me as if I were a nuisance, as if I were nobody. And the worst part was that she was doing it with a smile. I stood up and walked toward the hallway that led to the offices. Ora put herself in front of me with her arms open, as if she was going to physically stop me. She said, "Mr. Guerrero, you can't go through. If you insist, I'll have to call security." I stopped. I looked her in the eyes, and then I looked around. The marble floor that I chose, the walls that I painted white because Mary said it brought peace, the paintings that I bought at an auction in New York, they were gone. In their place were horrible abstract paintings, the kind that mean nothing. Everything had changed. Everything. I said, "This company is mine. I built it." Ora smiled again and said, "It was yours, Mr. Guerrero. Now things are different." And in her voice there was no mockery. There was something worse. There was pity. I left without saying anything else. I walked through the parking lot, my head burning, and then I saw them. 2 old workers, Martinez from production, who had been with me for 25 years, and LaMaile from maintenance, who started as a cleaner and whom I promoted to supervisor. They were smoking next to a truck. When they saw me, they froze. Martinez looked away. LaMaile lowered his head. Neither of them greeted me. Neither of them said anything. I walked past them, waiting for a gesture, a word, anything. But nothing. I got into my car and saw them in the rearview mirror. They were still there with cigarettes in hand, watching me leave. They were afraid. Afraid of being seen talking to me. Afraid of losing their jobs. Afraid of Robert. I started the car and drove away without knowing where to go. I drove through streets I knew by heart, but which now seemed foreign. I passed the park where I used to take Robert as a child, the church where I married Mary, the school where Ben studied. Everything the same, everything different. I was the one who had changed. Or rather, I was the one they had changed. I drove until the sun set and the streets became dark. The gas tank was on empty. I had no money for gas. I had nowhere to go. I had no one. I parked on a street I didn't know, in a neighborhood of low houses and repair shops, and I stayed there, my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, thinking, I am losing everything, and I don't know where to begin fighting. But what I didn't know was that someone was watching me, and that person was going to change everything. I parked on an unknown street, and I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, maybe an hour. I had been driving in circles, not knowing where to go. The car turned off by itself when the last bit of gas ran out. I stayed in the dark, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, looking through the dirty windshield. The neighborhood was modest. Single-story houses with faded facades, repair shops with the curtains half closed, a small corner store with a flickering yellow light bulb, a small church at the end of the street with a blue neon cross. I thought, I don't have money for gas. I don't have money for a taxi. I don't have money to eat. I have no one to call. And I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, something I thought I couldn't feel anymore. Fear. Pure, cold fear, like when I was a kid and got lost at the carnival. Then someone tapped on the window. 3 dry taps. I jumped. I turned my head and saw a face looking at me from outside. An older man, in his 70s, with gray hair and skin weathered by the sun. His hands were stained with black grease, and he wore faded blue coveralls. He looked at me with curiosity, not hostility. I rolled down the window a few inches, and he said, "Good evening, sir. Are you all right? You've been sitting there for a long time and haven't gotten out of the car. I wanted to make sure nothing happened to you." His voice was rough but kind. He smelled of motor oil and cigarettes. I said, "I'm fine, thank you." But my voice came out broken, cracked, and he noticed. The man looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything. Then he nodded slowly, as if he had made a decision. He said, "Look, I have a repair shop right across the street. I don't know what happened, and I'm not going to ask if you don't want to tell me. But you look like you haven't eaten in quite a while. I have fresh coffee and some delicious tacos my neighbor brought me. If you want, I'll treat you. No strings attached." I looked him in the eyes. There was no malice. There was no ulterior motive. There was just something I hadn't seen in days. Humanity. I opened the car door and got out. My legs were shaking. He held my arm and said, "Come on, buddy, it's right here." And we walked together towards his shop. The shop was small, a sheet metal shed with an oil-stained concrete floor. There was an old car on a lift, with the hood open and its insides exposed, tools hanging on the wall. A 3-year-old calendar with an image of the Virgin of Guadalupe. An old radio playing a classic American rock song. The man pointed to a plastic chair next to a wooden table and said, "Sit down, I'll get the coffee." He disappeared through a back door and returned with 2 steaming aluminum mugs. He sat down across from me on a wooden stool and said, "My name is Rupert Salvatierra. I've had this shop for 20 years, and you are Nick Guerrero. I know you by name. All of Albany knows the owner of the auto parts factory." I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged and said, "It's a small town, Mr. Nick. News travels fast." He took a sip of coffee and looked at me calmly. He didn't ask me anything. He just waited. And something in that silence, in that patience, made me open my mouth. I started to talk. I told him about Mary's funeral, about Robert's visit the next day. about the words he said to me, about the blocked cards, the bank, the pharmacy, the diner, the company where they wouldn't let me in, about Penelope Ora and her plastic smile, about the workers who wouldn't greet me, about Rose and the dementia rumor. I told him everything. Every humiliation, every blow, every stab. I talked for an hour straight, and he listened to me, without interrupting, without giving an opinion, without judging. He just listened. If you're listening to my story right now, I ask you to leave me a comment telling me where you're listening from. Sometimes, knowing that there is someone somewhere in the world listening to me gives me the strength to keep going. Because that night, in that shop that smelled of grease and cigarettes, I felt that someone was listening to me for the first time in days. Rupert didn't know me. He didn't owe me anything. He had no reason to help me. And yet, there he was, listening to me as if my story mattered, as if I mattered. And that, in that moment, was more valuable than all the money Robert had stolen from me. When I finished talking, I felt empty, exhausted, as if I had vomited everything inside. Rupert stayed silent for a moment, looking at his coffee cup. Then he looked up and said, "Mr. Nick, I'm going to tell you one thing. You're not crazy. Anyone who listens to you for 5 minutes realizes that your head is clearer than most. What's happening to you is not your fault. You are being hunted. And someone who hunts like that, with that kind of coldness, doesn't stop until the job is done. Your son won't stop until you have nothing left. No money, no company, no name. So you have 2 options. Either you let yourself be hunted, or you start fighting." I looked at him in silence. He was right. Of course, he was right. But fight with what? I had no money. I had no access to my accounts. I had no lawyer. I had no proof of anything. I said, "And how do I fight, Rupert? I have nothing." He nodded and stood up. He went to the kitchen in the back and returned with a plate. It had 2 bean tacos, a piece of cheese, and a banana. He put it in front of me and said, "First, eat. How long has it been since you ate?" I tried to remember. Yesterday? The day before? I didn't know. My stomach hurt, but not from hunger, from nerves, from rage. I picked up a taco and took a bite. It was cold, but it was the most delicious thing I had tasted in days. Rupert watched me eat and said, "After you eat, we'll think." I ate everything he put in front of me. Every bite gave me back a little strength. When I finished, Rupert collected the plates and said, "Look, Mr. Nick, I'm not a lawyer or a businessman or anything like that. I'm a mechanic. I fix cars, but I know a few things about life. Nobody fights well if they don't sleep and they don't eat. Tonight you're staying here. I have a small room in the back where I sometimes sleep when I have to work late. It's not the Ritz-Carlton, but it has a mattress and a blanket. Tomorrow, with a clear head, we'll figure out what to do." I looked at him, not knowing what to say. This man didn't know me. He had no obligation to me, and he was offering me more than my own son. The room was small. A twin mattress on some boards, a gray blanket that smelled of cheap fabric softener, a picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe tacked to the wall, a small window that looked out onto the alley. I lay down fully dressed, with my shoes on, staring at the sheet metal ceiling. Outside, I could hear the crickets and the distant sound of cars. I thought of Mary. I thought of our big bed with the cotton sheets she washed every week. I thought of how her hair smelled when she hugged me at night. And I wondered what she would say if she saw me there, sleeping in a repair shop, hiding from my own son. I closed my eyes and felt tears rolling down my temples. But I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. That night I slept. I don't know for how many hours. I don't know if it was 3 or 6 or 10. But I slept. I slept soundly, without nightmares, without waking up suddenly. And when I woke up, with the sun coming through the small window, I felt something I hadn't felt since Mary's funeral. Hope. I didn't know how I was going to fight. I didn't know with what weapons or with what allies, but I knew one thing. I wasn't alone. There was a 70-year-old mechanic who believed in me, who had given me shelter, food, and something more important: dignity. Rupert had given me refuge. But the weapons to fight were going to be given to me by someone else. Someone I didn't expect. Someone who had as much to lose as I did. Rupert woke me up with a mug of coffee and a piece of news. He said, "Mr. Nick, I put some gas in the car. It's not a lot, but it's enough to get to your house and back. Go, sort out your things, and if you need anything, I'm here. What we have plenty of here is grease, and what we lack is cash. But there's always coffee and a taco." He gave me a squeeze on the shoulder and walked me to the car. Before I got in, he said, "Remember what I told you. Someone who hunts like that doesn't stop until they're done. Move fast, Mr. Nick. Don't give them time to finish you off." I nodded, started the engine, and drove toward my house with a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what was waiting for me. But something told me it wasn't going to be good. I arrived at the house near noon. Everything looked the same from the outside. The garden with the roses Mary took care of, the bougainvillea climbing the wall, the wooden door I had a carpenter from Hartford make. But when I walked in, I knew something had happened. The study door was open. I always left it locked. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. And when I went inside, I felt the air leave my lungs. The desk drawers were open, ransacked, papers scattered on the floor. The bookshelf moved, and in the place where the desktop computer stood, there were only loose cables and a dust outline. They had taken it. Everything. The computer, the document folders, the backup hard drive, the USB drives. 40 years of files, gone. I stood in the middle of the mess, unable to move. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Carmela in the doorway. Her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. She said in a broken voice, "Mr. Nick, forgive me. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't." I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me. Yesterday afternoon, Raymond, my grandson, came with a black SUV and 2 guys she didn't know. He said Mr. Robert had sent him to pick up important documents, that they were orders, that it was for his grandfather's good. Carmela told him he couldn't take anything without my permission. But Raymond ignored her. They went into the study, emptied everything into boxes, and left. In less than an hour, without leaving anything. Carmela tried to call me, but my phone wasn't working, and she didn't know where to find me. I sat down in the desk chair and stared at the empty space where the computer had been. Everything was on that machine. 40 years of contracts, financial statements, correspondence with clients and suppliers, minutes of meetings, notarized powers of attorney, everything that proved who I was and what I had built. And now, it was in Robert's hands. I said to Carmela, "It's not your fault. You couldn't do anything." But inside, I felt the net closing. Every day, they took something else from me. First the money, then the company, then my name, and now the documents, the proof, the memory. They were erasing me, piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop them. Carmela was still standing in the doorway, twisting her hands. I told her to sit down. She obeyed, but she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Then she said, "Mr. Nick, there's something else I have to tell you." I felt a chill in my stomach. She took a deep breath and continued. Mr. Robert called me yesterday afternoon after they took the things. He told me they don't need me anymore, that starting next week the house will be empty, that you are going to a specialized clinic and the property will be put up for sale. I was frozen. I repeated, "A clinic?" Carmela nodded. That's what he said. A clinic for people with head problems, and that I no longer had anything to do here. I looked her in the eyes. Carmela Reyes, 15 years working in this house. She arrived when Mary started with the first symptoms and we needed help. She stayed all those years taking care of both of us. Mary trusted her more than anyone. She told her things she didn't tell me. She asked her for advice. She gave her the pearl necklace her mother inherited, and now Robert was throwing her out like old furniture. I said, "Carmela, listen to me carefully. I am not going to any clinic. I'm not crazy, and this house is not for sale. My son is lying. He is trying to take everything from me. But I'm not going to let him." She lifted her eyes. I saw tears, and I also saw something else. She wanted to believe me, but she was afraid. Carmela wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said, "I believe you, Mr. Nick. I've known you for 15 years. I know you're not out of your mind. But Mr. Robert, he's saying very awful things. To everyone. To the neighbors. To people at the company. To anyone who will listen. He says you don't remember things, that you get lost on the street, that you confuse people. He says you are a danger to yourself. And people are believing him, sir. People are believing him because he says it with such certainty. And because you haven't come out to deny it." I stayed quiet. She was right. I had hidden. I had been paralyzed. And in the meantime, Robert had taken control of the narrative, of my life, of my story. I took Carmela's hand. It was cold, shaking. I said, "Thank you for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy person. Now I need you to do something for me." She nodded, waiting. I said, "Go home, rest. Collect what they owe you and don't come back until I call you. And most importantly, don't tell anyone we spoke. Not Robert, not anyone in the family, not the neighbors, no one." Once she looked at me with wide eyes. She asked, "What are you going to do, Mr. Nick?" I said, "I'm going to fight, but I need to do it in silence. If Robert knows I'm fighting back, he's going to move faster. I need time." She nodded. She stood up and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Take care, sir, and God bless you." Then she left, and I was alone. I walked through the empty house. Every room was a punch. The kitchen where Mary prepared her turkey and mashed potatoes every Thanksgiving. The dining room where we celebrated my mother's 80th birthday. The bedroom where my 2 children were born, because Mary didn't want to go to the hospital. Everything was the same, and everything was different. The silence was thick, heavy, like a wet blanket. Mary's scent was still in some corners, in the closet, in the curtains, in the pillow I hadn't washed. But every day it was fainter, more distant. Soon it would disappear, and I would be left alone with the walls, if they even let me stay. I thought, I need help. I need someone who knows the law, someone who knows how this works, someone who will help me fight. Then I thought of Theodore Ted Munoz, a childhood friend. We grew up together in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, played on the same football team. He studied law while I went into business. He became a corporate lawyer, specializing in business law. For 40 years, he was my legal advisor. He helped me incorporate the company, sign contracts, resolve conflicts. He was honest, smart, loyal. but we hadn't spoken in 2 years. A stupid argument about politics at a dinner party. We argued, said things we shouldn't have, and neither of us had the pride to pick up the phone afterwards. Mary told me to call him, that life is short, that pride is poison. But I didn't listen. And now she was gone, and I needed Ted more than ever. I went to the landline in the living room, the only one that still worked in the house. I picked up the receiver and dialed Ted's number. I still knew it by heart. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I thought, he's not going to answer. He doesn't want anything to do with me. Then I heard a click and a gruff voice that said, "Hello?" It was him. My throat closed up. I said, "Ted, it's Nick. Nick Guerrero." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Nick, it's been a long time." I said, "Ted, I need your help. I'm in trouble, serious trouble. My son is destroying me." Another silence. Then he said, "Come to my office tomorrow at 10 and bring everything you have." He hung up without saying goodbye. But it didn't matter. I was going to see him. I had a chance. Ted agreed to help me. But the evidence that changed everything didn't come from him. It was brought to me by someone I didn't expect. Someone who knocked on my door that very night. It was almost 11 at night when I heard a knock at the door. 3 soft, almost timid knocks. I got up from the sofa where I was sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, and walked slowly toward the entrance. Since Mary's funeral, I hadn't received anyone. The neighbors stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. The house had become an island. I looked through the peephole and saw a figure in the dim light. A woman. Thin, dark hair pulled back. I recognized her immediately. It was Joan, Robert's wife, my daughter-in-law. The one who was in my living room the day of the takeover, staring at the floor while her husband stole my life. I hesitated for a moment. Then I opened the door. She rushed in, almost pushing me, and closed the door behind her. Her eyes were wide open. She was looking back as if someone might have followed her. I looked at her closely and saw that she was devastated. Pale as paper, deep, almost black dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were shaking. She had a manila folder clutched against her chest, like a lifeline. I said, "Joan, what are you doing here? Is something wrong?" She looked at me with the eyes of a cornered animal. She said, "Father-in-law, I have to show you something. If I don't do it now, I won't have the courage later. And you need to see this. You need to know what is happening." Her voice was a thin thread. It broke with every word. I told her to sit down, but she shook her head. She said, "I don't have time. Robert thinks I went to the 24-hour pharmacy. If I take too long, he's going to get suspicious." She sat on the edge of the sofa without leaning back and placed the folder on the coffee table. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a pile of printed sheets. Joan started taking the papers out one by one, explaining everything to me. She said, "I found all this on Robert's computer. He has a hidden folder. He thought no one would see it, but I saw it, and I copied everything. They were emails. Dozens of emails. Between Robert and a man named Ulysses Price. I knew the name. An investor from Houston who had tried to buy part of the company a few years ago. I told him no. He seemed shady to me. Too aggressive. And now he was in contact with my son. The emails talked about corporate restructuring, liquidation of unproductive assets, removal of the majority shareholder due to mental incapacity. I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. They were planning to take the company from me, legally. With papers, with lawyers, with everything. I kept reading. Every page was worse than the last. There were purchase agreements with future dates, stock transfers that I never authorized, notarized powers of attorney with my forged signature. I knew it because I never sign with that flourish. Mary taught me how to make a signature that no one could copy. And that wasn't my signature. There were also requests for medical reports addressed to 3 different psychiatrists. They requested evaluations for severe cognitive deterioration for an 82-year-old patient. The patient was me. The requests were signed by Robert as the responsible family member. Everything was dated. Everything was organized. Everything was ready to be executed. Only one thing was missing: the judge's signature to declare me legally incompetent. One of the emails chilled my blood. It was dated 3 days before Mary's funeral. It read, "Ulysses, the old lady is about to kick the bucket. As soon as that happens, we move. I have everything ready. Aura already prepared the documents. The old man won't know what hit him." And further down, Ulysses replied, "Perfect. Between the company and the properties, we're talking about $80 million. You get 40% and I get the rest. In 60 days, we're partners." I felt my stomach turn over. I read it again and again. My son, my own son. He had been planning this for months, while Mary was dying in the hospital, while I was holding her hand and promising her everything would be okay. Robert was in his office calculating how much he would gain from his mother's death and his father's destruction. I put the papers on the table and just stared at them without saying anything. My hands were shaking. I felt sick. I felt the living room spinning around me. Joan looked at me with tear-filled eyes. She said, "Father-in-law, I didn't know, I swear to you. I didn't know any of this. I knew Robert was ambitious. I knew he wanted the company. But I didn't know he was capable of this, of destroying his own father, of forging documents, of hiring psychiatrists to declare you crazy. When I saw it," her voice broke. "When I saw it, I couldn't stay quiet. I couldn't." I asked her, "Why are you bringing this to me, Joan? Why don't you go to the police?" She shook her head. She said, "Because the police won't believe me. Robert has contacts. He has money. He has lawyers. You are the only one who can do something with this." I stood up from the sofa. I walked to the window and stared at the empty street. I thought of Mary, of the last week of her life. When the pain no longer let her sleep, one night she squeezed my hand very tightly and said, "Nick, be careful of Robert. He is not the son you think he is. I've seen things. I've heard things. Promise me you'll open your eyes." I told her yes, of course, to calm down. But I didn't listen to her. I thought it was the delirium from the morphine. I thought she was confused. But no. Mary knew. Mary saw what I didn't want to see and tried to warn me, and I didn't listen to her. Now she was dead, and I was alone with a bundle of papers that proved my son was a monster. I turned back to Joan. She was still sitting on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped over her knees. I asked her, "Does Robert suspect anything?" She shook her head. "No, I did it when he wasn't here. I copied everything to a USB drive and deleted the history. But if he finds out..." She didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. I knew what Robert was capable of. I asked her, "Why did you do it, Joan? You're his wife. You have a son with him. Why take a risk like this?" She looked at me with tearful eyes and said, "Because I can't take it anymore, father-in-law. I've been enduring it for years. The marriage has been dead for a long time. I only stay for Raymond. But this is too much. What Robert is doing to you, I can't be a part of that. You don't deserve this. I can't look you in the face knowing what I know." Joan stood up. She had to leave before Robert got suspicious. I said, "Joan, what you did today has a price. If Robert finds out, he's going to come after you, after Raymond, after everything." She nodded. She said, "I know, but you always treated me well. Mary loved me like a daughter. She taught me how to cook her turkey. She gave me her mother's necklace when Raymond was born. She told me once, 'If Robert ever gets difficult, come find me. I will help you.' But she's gone now, so I came to you." I felt a knot in my throat. I said, "Thank you, daughter. Thank you for being brave. I won't let you pay for this alone. I promise you." She gave me a quick hug, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Destroy him, father-in-law. Destroy Robert before he destroys you." Then she left through the back door, disappearing into the night. I was left alone in the living room, with the papers scattered on the table. I looked at them for a long time. Each one was a stab. Each email, each contract, each forged signature. But they were also something else. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that there was a plan. Proof that my son was a criminal. I thought of Ted, of the appointment I had tomorrow. Now I had something to show him. Something concrete. Something he could use. But I also thought of Joan, of the risk she had taken, of what would happen to her if Robert discovered the truth. And I thought of Mary, of her last warning, of how she was trying to protect me from the grave. I closed my eyes and said out loud, "Forgive me, my love. Forgive me for not listening to you. But I promise you I'm going to fix this. I promise you." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed sitting on the sofa, with Joan's documents in my hands, reading them over and over again, memorizing every detail, every date, every name, every figure. When dawn broke, my eyes were burning, and my head was full of numbers. But I also had something I hadn't had in days: ammunition. Joan had given me the weapons to fight. Now I just needed an army. Ted was the first. But I was going to need more. I was going to need someone from inside the family. Someone who knew Robert. Someone who had as much to lose as I did. And then I thought of Ben, my younger son. The one who moved to Dallas years ago. The one who hardly ever called. The one who seemed to have forgotten about me. It was time to find him. It was time to see whose side he was on. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe now. Every day there is someone telling what they never could say out loud. Leave your comment and tell me if you've also been through something similar. At 10 o'clock in the morning the next day, I was sitting in Ted Munoz's office. It was a small office, full of law books piled up to the ceiling, smelling of old coffee and yellowed paper. Ted was on the other side of the desk, with Joan's documents spread out in front of him. He read them slowly, frowning, running his hand over his bald spot every time he found something new. I watched him in silence, my heart pounding in my throat. When he finished, he put the papers on the table and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him, a mix of rage and astonishment. He said, "Nick, this is corporate fraud, document forgery, attempted illegal conservatorship. Your son could go to jail, and Ulysses Price too. This is serious, very serious." I asked him what we could do. Ted leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Then he said, "First, we need to block the conservatorship. If Robert gets a judge to declare you incompetent, we lose everything. I'm going to file an emergency injunction. Second, we need more witnesses. Joan is key, but one person isn't enough. We need people from inside the company. Shareholders who are loyal to you, someone from the family who can testify on your behalf. I thought of Ben again. The one who went to Dallas 10 years ago because he couldn't stand Robert's temper. The one who didn't come to his mother's funeral because he was late for the airport. Or so he said. Ted lent me his phone, and I dialed Ben's number. It rang 4 times. I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then I heard his voice, rough, tired. "Hello?" I said, "Ben, it's me, your father." Silence. Long. Then he said, "Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I told him no, that I wasn't okay, that his brother was destroying me. I told him everything, the takeover, the cards, the bank, the diner, the company, Jones' documents, the conservatorship, everything. I talked for 15 minutes straight, and he listened in silence. When I finished, there was another long pause. I thought he was going to tell me he couldn't get involved, that he had his life in Dallas, that it was between Robert and me. But then he said something that broke me. "I'm coming there, Dad. Forgive me for not coming sooner." I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid of Robert. I was always afraid of him. 2 days later, Ben arrived in Albany. I saw him walk through the door of Ted's office, and I felt my knees buckle. He was thinner than I remembered, with gray hair at his temples and wrinkles around his eyes. But he still had the same face he had as a child. The same face as Mary. He walked toward me and hugged me, tight. Without saying anything, I felt my shoulders shaking, and I realized I was crying. He was too. We stayed like that for a long time, hugging in the middle of Ted's office, crying like 2 lost children. Then he pulled away, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I'm not going to leave you alone, Dad. I promise you. We're going to put an end to this together." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could win. For the next 3 days, we worked nonstop. Ted prepared the lawsuit and the request for the injunction. Ben contacted 3 old shareholders of the company who had always been loyal to me. Mr. Perry, who was my first partner, Lawyer Arthur, my second cousin, and Mr. Howard, an investor who came in during the 90s. All 3 agreed to support me. Joan, meanwhile, kept gathering evidence. Every night she sent me encrypted emails with more documents from Robert's computer. Contracts, transfers, messages with Ulysses Price. Everything was adding up. Everything was fitting together. It seemed like the plan was working. It seemed like we were going to succeed. But on Thursday morning, everything fell apart. Joan disappeared. I tried to call her cell. Off. I sent her messages. No answer. I wrote to her email. Nothing. I called the house, and the housekeeper answered. She told me that Mrs. Joan had left early with Mr. Robert and hadn't come back. That she took a small suitcase. That Mr. Robert said they were going to Houston for a few days. I felt a hollow in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I told Ted and Ben to come with me. We drove to Robert's house in the Las Lomas subdivision. I rang the doorbell. I waited. The door opened, and there he was, my older son, with a smile that chilled my blood. Robert leaned on the doorframe and looked at me with a frightening calm. He said, "Dad, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" I told him I was looking for Joan, that I needed to talk to her. He broadened his smile, a wolf's smile. He said, "Oh, Joan. Yes, she's resting. I took her to a clinic in Houston. A very nice, very quiet place. The stress of grieving really affected her, you know. She started having insomnia, anxiety, strange ideas. The doctor said she needed rest, a few weeks of inpatient care for her own good." I looked him in the eyes. I knew exactly what he had done. Joan wasn't sick. Joan had betrayed him, and he had taken revenge. I took a step closer. I said, "Robert, I know what you did. I know everything. The contracts, the transfers, the emails with Ulysses Price, the forged signatures, the conservatorship, everything." He didn't lose his smile. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I think you're confused. Again, I told you, you're not well. You should go get checked out." Ben took a step forward. He said, "That's enough, Robert. We know what you're doing, and we're going to stop you." Robert looked at him with contempt. He said, "Oh, look who showed up, the prodigal son, the one who ran off to Dallas because he couldn't handle the pressure. Now you're coming to play the hero?" Ben clenched his fists. I grabbed his arm. I said, "Let's go. There's nothing more to do here." And we left, our blood boiling and our spirits crushed. Back in Ted's office, I dropped into a chair. I said, "Joan was our main witness, the one who had access to everything. Without her, the case is weakened. Robert knows that. That's why he locked her up." Ted was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Wait. Before she disappeared, Joan did something smart. Something very smart." I looked at him, not understanding. He opened his computer and showed me his email inbox. There were 3 messages from Joan, sent the night before her disappearance, each one to a different address. Ted, Ben, and a third one I didn't recognize. In all 3, there was the same thing. Copies of all the documents, all the emails, all the evidence. Joan had sent backups as a safeguard, in case something happened to her. She had also forwarded copies to me. Ted closed the computer and looked at me. He said, "Your daughter-in-law knew this could happen. She knew Robert would find out sooner or later. That's why she sent everything ahead of time. The evidence is safe. The case is still on." I felt a relief that loosened my muscles, but I also felt anguish. Because Joan was still locked in a clinic in Houston, alone, scared, paying the price for having helped me. I said to Ted, "We have to get her out of there." He nodded. He said, "I'm going to request a court order, but I need more. I need something to prove that the confinement was forced. I need another witness." I fell silent. Another witness? Who else knew what was happening? Then I thought of someone. Someone who had been there the whole time. Someone who saw everything without anyone seeing her. And 2 days later, that person knocked on the door. 2 days before the shareholders' meeting, I heard a knock at the door of Ted's office. It was 7 in the evening. It was getting dark. Ted went to open it, and I heard a woman's voice. A voice I knew. I peeked into the hallway and saw her. Carmela, my Carmela, the woman who worked in my house for 15 years. She was standing in the doorway, a grocery bag clutched to her chest, trembling like a leaf. Ted looked at her suspiciously. He said, "Who are you?" She swallowed and said, "I'm Carmela Reyes. I worked for Mr. Nick and Mrs. Mary for 15 years, and I have something to show you." I went over. I put my hand on her shoulder. I said, "Come in, Carmela. You're among friends." We sat her down in a chair and gave her a glass of water. Her hands were shaking as she held it. Ted asked her what she had brought. She took a deep breath, opened the grocery bag, and pulled out a bundle of papers, receipts, printed photos, and a spiral notebook. She put everything on the desk. She said, "Lawyer, I worked in that house for 15 years. I saw things. I heard things. And I saved things. Because Mrs. Mary asked me to." Ted and I looked at each other. Carmela continued, "Mr. Robert always treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't exist. He would talk on the phone in front of me. He would leave papers on the table. He never said hello. He never looked at me. but I was there. I was always there, and I saw everything. Ted started reviewing what Carmela had brought. There were receipts for bank deposits into accounts that weren't the company's. There were photos of documents she took with her phone when Robert left them on the dining room table. There were handwritten notes with instructions for Penelope Ora. There were copies of contracts Robert signed without my knowledge. And there was a notebook where Carmela had written down every suspicious conversation she heard for months. Dates, names, exact phrases, everything. Ted looked up from the papers and said, "Mrs. Carmela, how long did you keep all this?" She said, "Almost a year, lawyer, since Mrs. Mary asked me to." I felt my chest tighten. I asked her, "Carmela, Mary asked you to keep this?" She nodded. She said, "Yes, Mr. Nick. It was a few months before she got really sick. She called me into her room, closed the door, and said, 'Carmela, I'm seeing things I don't like. Robert is changing. He's doing things secretly. I don't want to worry Nick because he has enough to worry about taking care of me. But I need you to be my eyes, to save everything you see, to write down everything you hear, and if anything ever happens to Nick, you take it to a lawyer.'" That's what she told me, and I promised her I would do it. I felt my eyes well up with tears. Mary? My Mary? She knew, she always knew, and she protected me the only way she could. Ted combined Carmela's documents with Joan's emails. Now he had a complete file. Emails, forged contracts, illegal transfers, first-hand testimonies, photos, notes, everything. I said, "Is this enough to get Joan out of the clinic?" He nodded. He said, "It's enough for that and more. I'm going to request an emergency court order. With this, I can prove that Joan's confinement was forced, that there is no legitimate diagnosis, that it is a kidnapping disguised as medical treatment." He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and said, "I'm going to the courthouse right now. If we're lucky, Joan will be free tomorrow morning." He rushed out of the office, and I stayed there, looking at Carmela, not knowing how to thank her. The next morning, Ted called me at 7. He said, "We have the order. I'm leaving for Houston now." 3 hours later, he sent me a message. "We have her. Joan is free. We're coming back." I felt my heart return to my chest. I sat in a chair and took a deep breath. Ben looked at me and said, "Is she okay, Dad?" I told him yes, Joan was free, that she was on her way. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile since he arrived. At 2 in the afternoon, Ted arrived at the office with Joan. When I saw her, I felt a punch in the stomach. She was thin, pale, and had dark circles under her eyes. Her lips were dry and her hair was dirty. But her eyes shone with anger, with determination. She hugged me and whispered in my ear, "I'm ready, father-in-law. I'm going to finish him." We all sat around Ted's desk, him, me, Ben, Joan, Carmela, and Ted explained the situation to us. Robert had called an extraordinary shareholders meeting for Thursday. At that meeting, he was going to introduce a motion to remove me as company president due to mental incapacity. He was going to show the supposed medical reports. He was going to ask to be named interim president. And with the support of Ulysses Price and other shareholders he had bought off, he would probably win the vote. If that happened, I would lose the company, lose everything, and Robert would get away with it. Ted looked at all of us and said, "But we are going to be there, and we're going in with everything we have." Ted explained the plan. He would arrive at the assembly with a court order preventing any motion related to my alleged incapacity. He would present the evidence of fraud, the emails, the forged contracts, the illegal transfers. He would publicly denounce Robert and Ulysses Price in front of all the shareholders. And most importantly, Joan would walk in with me, Robert's wife, on her father-in-law's side. That would be a devastating blow. I asked Ted, "Do you think it will work?" He looked at me seriously and said, "Nick, in a courtroom, the person with the best evidence wins. And we have the best evidence. But in a shareholders' meeting, image also matters. And the image of your enemy's wife standing next to you, that is priceless." I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed sitting in my living room, looking at Mary's portrait on the mantel. I thought of everything that had happened in the last few weeks. The funeral, the takeover, the humiliations, the loneliness. And I also thought of the people who had appeared to help me. Rupert, the mechanic who gave me refuge when I had nowhere to go. Joan, who risked everything to give me the evidence. Carmela, who kept what Mary asked her to for months. Ben, who finally faced his fear and came to fight with me. Ted, who put his pride aside and agreed to help an old friend. I thought, I'm not alone. I was never alone. I just didn't know it. The next morning, I went to see Rupert. I told him everything. The assembly, the plan, the evidence. He listened to me in silence, wiping his hands with a greasy rag. When I finished, he said, "Nick, I don't know anything about companies or assemblies or laws. I'm a mechanic. I fix cars. But I do know one thing. I know how to be on the right side, and you're on the right side. So if you need me there, I'll be there." I looked at him with moist eyes. I said, "Rupert, you've already done so much for me. You don't have to." He interrupted me. He said, "Sir, I don't have to do anything, but I want to, and that's different." He gave me a handshake that felt like a hug, and I knew he would be there, that everyone would be there. Thursday arrived. I woke up at 5 in the morning without needing an alarm. I took a hot shower. I shaved carefully. I put on the dark suit I wore on my wedding day with Mary. The same one I wore the day I opened the factory. The same one I wore when they gave me the Entrepreneur of the Year award. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw an 82-year-old man with wrinkles and gray hair and liver spots on his hands. But I also saw something else. I saw a man who hadn't given up. I saw a man who still had strength. I saw a man who was going to walk into that room and look his son in the eyes. I adjusted my tie, took a deep breath, and said out loud, "Today, Robert, you're going to find out who I am." And when I walked into that boardroom with Joan by my side, with Ben behind me, with Ted and Carmela and Rupert and all the others, I saw my son's face, and I knew I had already won. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor of the building I built 40 years ago. The same walls I put up, the same marble floor I chose, the same mahogany table I had shipped from North Carolina because Mary said it conveyed seriousness. I arrived at 9:30 in the morning. The meeting was at 10. I parked in front of the main entrance and stayed in the car for a moment, looking at the facade. My name was there in gold letters, Guerrero Industrial Group, the name that cost me 40 years of work, the name my son wanted to erase. I took a deep breath. I opened the door and got out of the car. I felt the morning sun on my face. And I thought, this ends today. One way or another, this ends today. I saw the shareholders walking through the main door. Some I had known all my life, Mr. Perry, my first partner, Lawyer Arthur, my cousin, Mr. Howard, who invested with me in the 90s. They greeted me with a nod, discreetly, without stopping. Others were new faces, people in expensive suits and fake smiles. Ulysses Price's people, investors Robert had brought in over the last few months to secure the votes. And at the door, controlling who came in and who didn't, was Penelope Ora Medina. In her pantsuit, with her electronic tablet and her plastic smile. She saw me coming, and her smile froze. But she didn't say anything. She just stood there, waiting, like a spider in its web. But I wasn't coming alone. Behind me was Ben, my younger son, his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the door. Beside him, Ted Munoz, with a leather briefcase full of documents and the expression of someone about to enter a war. Behind them, my cousin Arthur and 3 old company directors who had decided to support me. And at the very end, walking with a straight back and eyes forward, came Joan, Robert's wife, the mother of his son, the woman he locked in a clinic to silence her. And now she was there, on the enemy's side, on the right side. And seeing her, I knew we had already won the first battle. Because Robert didn't expect this. He didn't expect his own wife to betray him. We walked toward the door. Penelope Aura stepped into the middle, holding up her tablet like a shield. She said, "Mr. Guerrero, you are not on the guest list. You cannot enter." I looked her in the eyes, those cold eyes that had looked at me with contempt a few weeks ago. I said, "I built this building. I founded this company. I pay your salary. Step aside." She didn't move. Then Ted took a step forward. He took a document out of his briefcase and shoved it in her face. He said, "Court order. Injunction protecting the rights of Mr. Nick Guerrero Belgrave. If you try to prevent his entry, I will have you arrested for contempt." Aura looked at the document. She looked at Ted. She looked at Joan, and she stepped aside without saying a word. The way was clear. We took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. No one spoke. All we heard was the whir of the motor and our own breathing. When the doors opened, I saw the hallway leading to the boardroom. At the end, the double wooden doors were open. We could hear Robert's voice inside, talking, giving a speech. We walked toward it. My shoes echoed on the marble. Every step was a heartbeat. When I reached the door, I stopped. Inside, the room was full. 25 people sitting around the table. And at the head of the table, standing in a navy blue suit and a red tie, was Robert. He was saying, "We are here to formalize a new stage in the history of this company," when he saw me. And his voice died in his throat. I walked into the room slowly, without haste, looking him in the eyes. The others walked in behind me. Ben, Ted, Arthur, Joan, the directors, and finally, Rupert, in his clean coveralls and his mechanic's hands, who stood by the door like a guardian. Robert was staring at me without blinking. Then he looked at Joan, and I saw his face fall apart, as if he had been punched in the stomach. I walked to the front of the room and stood in front of him. Ted placed the briefcase on the table. He opened it and pulled out a bundle of documents. He let them drop with a dry thud. And he said, in a loud voice so everyone could hear, "Mr. Nick Guerrero Belgrave is the sole legal president of this company. Here is the evidence of corporate fraud, document forgery, and attempted illegal conservatorship committed by Robert Guerrero Urrutia and Ulysses Price Montemayor." The silence was absolute. No one was breathing. Ulysses Price, who was sitting near Robert, jumped to his feet. He said, "This is ridiculous. It's slander. You can't just walk in here and—" Ted interrupted him by raising his hand. He said, "Mr. Price, your name appears in 47 emails detailing the plan to strip Mr. Guerrero of his company through fraud. You also appear in stock purchase agreements that Mr. Guerrero never signed. I suggest you call your lawyer. You're going to need one." Price fell silent. He opened his mouth and closed it. Then he turned to Robert for support. But Robert wasn't looking at him. Robert was looking at me. And in his eyes, there was something I had never seen before. Fear. Ted continued speaking. He explained every document, every email, every forged contract. He showed the illegal transfers, the requests for psychiatric evaluations, the plan to lock Joan in the Houston clinic. Everything. The shareholders listened in silence, with expressions of horror. Some looked at Robert, others looked at the floor. When Ted finished, he pointed to Joan and said, "Mrs. Joan Volpini Guerrero, the wife of the accused, provided this evidence voluntarily. She was forcibly confined to a psychiatric clinic in Houston as retaliation for reporting these crimes. She was released 2 days ago by court order." He looked at the entire room and concluded, Robert Guerrero's own wife could not bear to see what her husband had become. That is why she is here, on the right side. Robert was still standing at the head of the table, but he no longer looked the same. His shoulders had slumped. His face had turned gray. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and defeat. I took a step closer. I looked him in the eyes, those eyes that were once the eyes of a child who asked me to teach him how to ride a bicycle. Those eyes that were now those of a stranger. And I said slowly, so that every word reached his core, "The day after we buried your mother, you sat in my living room and told me, 'Your good life is over, Dad.' Do you remember?" He didn't answer. I continued, "Well, today, son, you are discovering something. Your good life never began. Because a good life is not built by stealing. It's not built by lying. It's not built by destroying your own blood." Robert lowered his head. He didn't say anything. He had nothing to say. Penelope Ora had disappeared through the back door. Ulysses Price was slumped in his chair, phone in hand, dialing desperately. The shareholders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Then Mr. Perry, my first partner, the man who was with me from the beginning, stood up, looked at me, and said, "Nick, this company was always yours, and it remains yours. You have my vote." Then Arthur stood up, then Mr. Howard, then others. One by one, the shareholders who truly knew me stood up. Some applauded, others nodded their heads, and I stood there, facing my defeated son, feeling the weight I had carried for weeks finally lift from my shoulders. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I didn't shout with joy. I just took a deep breath and looked around. I saw Ben, his eyes moist and a shaky smile. I saw Ted, closing his briefcase with the satisfaction of a job well done. I saw Joan, pale but firm, looking at her husband with an expression that was not hatred, but pity. I saw Carmela, who had slipped in at the end without me noticing, standing next to Rupert by the door, wiping her eyes with a tissue. And I saw Rupert, the mechanic who gave me refuge when I had nowhere to go, looking at me with pride as if I were his own father. I said to everyone, "Thank you." Just that, thank you. Then I looked up at the ceiling where I imagined Mary was and thought, "We did it, my love. We did it together, like always." But the story wasn't over yet. One last conversation was missing, the most difficult of all. 2 days after the assembly, I called Robert and asked him to come to the house. Only him. Without lawyers, without Joan, without anyone. I wanted to talk to my son one last time. I wanted to look him in the eyes and understand. He agreed. He arrived at 5 in the afternoon when the sun was setting and the light streamed golden through the windows. I opened the door and saw him. He was haggard, deep dark circles under his eyes, his tie loose, his suit wrinkled. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. I let him in without saying anything. We walked to the living room and sat in the same places where we sat the day of the takeover. He in Mary's chair, I on the sofa across from him. The same room, the same light. But everything was different. This time, the one with the power was me. We stayed in silence for a moment. He was looking at the floor. I was looking at him. Finally, I spoke. I said, "Robert, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to answer me with the truth. Even if it hurts, even if it's awful, the truth." He nodded without looking up. I took a deep breath and asked, "Did you ever love me, son?" The silence grew thick, long. He continued to stare at the floor. I saw his jaw tremble, saw him clench his fists on his knees. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. I thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he looked up and met my eyes. And what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't wickedness. It wasn't hatred. It was pain. An old, deep, festering pain. Robert spoke slowly, his voice rough. He said, "I don't know, Dad. I don't know if I ever loved you. What I know is that I always wanted to be like you. Since I was a kid, I wanted you to look at me the way you looked at the company. I wanted you to be proud of me the way you were proud of your accomplishments. But I never could. I was never enough. Ben was the sensitive one, the good one, the one who looked like Mom. And I was the ambitious one, the tough one, the one who never did anything right. Every time I tried something, you corrected me. Every time I suggested something, you improved it. You never let me win. You never let me shine. And that slowly rotted me from the inside. Until one day, I realized that the only way to be like you was to take everything away from you. I listened without interrupting him. Every word cut like a knife. But not from rage, from sadness. Because I realized he was right. Not in what he did. That has no justification. But in what he felt. I had seen him as my heir, not as my son. I had trained him to take my place. But I never asked him if he wanted that place. I never asked him what he dreamed of, what he needed, what hurt him. I raised him to be strong. But I didn't teach him to ask for help. I raised him to win. But I didn't teach him how to lose. And he became this. A man who didn't know how to do anything but destroy. Because he never learned to build on his own foundation, only on mine. I said, "Robert, what you did is unforgivable. You tried to rob me. You tried to lock me up. You tried to erase me. And you did it while your mother was dying in a hospital. I will never forget that." He nodded without saying anything. I continued, "But you are my son. And I don't want to see you in prison. I don't want Raymond to grow up visiting his father in a penitentiary. So I'm going to give you one way out. Only one." He looked at me with wide eyes. I said, "You are going to resign from the company. Today. You are going to return every penny you diverted. You are going to apologize to Joan. On your knees, if necessary. And you are going to disappear for a while. Far away. Where no one knows you, where you can start over. If you do all that, I will drop the charges. And this ends here." Robert looked at me in silence. Then he asked, "And if I don't accept?" I looked him in the eyes and said, "Then I let justice decide. Ted has everything ready to file the lawsuit. Corporate fraud, document forgery, kidnapping. You will go to trial, and you will lose. Not because of me, but because of the evidence. And when you lose, you will go to jail. A minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 15. So you decide, son. You can disappear with dignity, or you can disappear in a cell." He stayed silent for a long moment. I saw his hands trembling, how he clenched his jaw, how he looked around the room, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Finally, he stood up. He looked at me and said, "I accept." Then he walked toward the door and left, without saying goodbye, without turning around, without saying anything else. That was the last time I saw Robert. A week later, he signed his resignation before a notary. He returned the diverted money, almost all of it, because Ulysses Price had already spent some of it. He wrote a letter to Joan, asking for forgiveness, and left for London. To the UK, I was told. He has an acquaintance there who got him a job in imports. I don't know how he is doing. I don't ask. Raymond stayed with Joan. Sometimes he visits me on Sundays. We don't talk much, but he's here, and that is something. Joan filed for divorce and got it in 3 months. I did what I had to do. I gave her 10% of the company's shares. She didn't want to accept. She said she hadn't done it for the money. I told her, I know. That's why I'm giving it to you. Now she has a nice house downtown, with a yard for Raymond. She opened an art gallery with a partner. She is doing well. She smiles more. Sometimes she comes over for coffee, and we talk about Mary, about the old days, about what she did for me when no one else dared. And I always tell her the same thing. Thank you, daughter. Without you, I wouldn't be here. I stayed on as president of the company for 6 more months, just long enough to organize everything, to close the bad contracts, to fire Ulysses Price's people, to restore the confidence of the shareholders who had been scared, and to do something I owed myself. I had Rupert's shop remodeled. New roof, polished concrete floor, state-of-the-art tools, a sign with his name on the entrance. He didn't want to accept. He said it was fine as it was, that he didn't need anything. I told him, Rupert, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You gave me coffee when I didn't even have money for a donut. You gave me dignity when my own son had taken it from me. This isn't charity. This is justice. He was silent for a moment. Then he gave me a handshake and said, All right, buddy. But the Sunday coffee is still free. When everything was stable at the company, I called Ben to my office. I sat him down across from me and said, Son, I've done my part. 42 years at the head of this company. I don't have the strength for any more. I want to go home. I want to take care of your mother's roses. I want to live out the rest of my days in peace. So the company is yours. He looked at me with moist eyes and said, I love it, Dad, and I promise I'll take care of it. We signed the papers that same afternoon. Today, my life is peaceful. I wake up early, as always. I eat breakfast alone in the kitchen. With the radio turned low, I go out to the garden to water the roses. Mary planted 30 years ago. I prune them. I talk to them. I tell them how everything is going. Then I sit on the iron bench we bought on a trip to Vermont and stay there for a while, looking at the sky. At 11, Carmela arrives. Carmela, she came back to work with me last month. I doubled her salary and gave her her own key. Now she is not my employee. She is my family. On Sundays, I go to Rupert's shop. We drink coffee in his aluminum mugs and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes he helps me fix something on the car. Sometimes we just sit quietly listening to the radio. And that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. People ask me if I hate Robert, if I want to see him destroyed, if I'm glad he lost everything. And the truth is, no. I don't hate him. I can't. He's my son. He has my blood. He has Mary's nose. He has my father's hands. How can I hate that? Hatred is a prison, and I've been locked up for too long. But I don't forgive him either. Not yet. Maybe never. Because forgiving is not forgetting. Forgiving is letting go of the weight so you can walk. And I let go of the weight. But I didn't forget what happened. I didn't forget the day he sat in Mary's chair and told me my good life was over. I didn't forget the humiliations. I didn't forget the lies. I didn't forget Joan locked in a clinic. You don't forget that. You carry that. But you can carry it without letting it crush you. If someone going through something similar asked me for advice, I would tell them this: don't give up. Even if your own blood betrays you, even if they take everything from you, even if they tell you you're crazy, even if they look at you with pity, even if they close the doors on you, even if they leave you alone, you are still you. Your name, your story, your dignity. No one can steal that from you. They can take your money. They can take your company. They can take your reputation. But they cannot take who you are. And if you stay on your feet, if you don't give up, if you seek help, even if you're ashamed, you will find good people. People like Rupert. People like Ted. People like Carmela. People who show up when you need them most. And with those people, you can fight. And you can win. I won. At 82 years old, without money, without a phone, without access to my accounts, I won. So you can too. And you who listened to me until the end, were you ever betrayed by someone in your own family? What did you do? What would you do differently if you could go back? Leave me your answer in the comments. Tell me your story, because sometimes telling what happened is the first step toward healing. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your comment helps me continue telling these stories. Stories of ordinary people. Stories of pain. Stories of struggle. Stories like yours. Thank you for listening until the end. I'll see you in the next story.